Good afternoon and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Planetary Pause series. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis, and I'm happy to welcome you here today and also to welcome our guests, Linda and Charlie Bloom. They are trained as psychotherapists and relationship counselors. They have worked with individuals, couples, groups, and organizations since 1975. They have lectured and taught at learning institutes throughout the USA, including Esalen Institute, the Hoffman Institute, JFK University, UC Berkeley Extension, the World Health Organization, and many others. They have offered seminars in many countries abroad, including China, Japan, Denmark, Sweden, Brazil, India. They've been everywhere. So they've been married since 1972, and I can guarantee they have plumbed the depths of relationship dynamics. I've known them a long time and have seen them really think through so many different situations that they're brilliant in this area. So some of their books include Happily Ever After and 39 Other Myths About Love, That Which Doesn't Kill Us, and 101 Things I Wish I Knew When I Got Married. And they're soon to be published, Love in the Time of Crisis, Tools for Relationships in Changing Times. So welcome, Linda and Charlie.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Oh, it's great to have you here. So one of the first questions I want to ask you, because being psychologists, we haven't really dealt with this in one of our sessions yet, is we've all been through some incredible stress this past year for many different reasons. And I would like to see if you have some practical advice for those of us who either have felt isolated by being separated from people so much, or maybe having too much togetherness time with people we can't separate from. So I'd like to get your opinion on how do we deal with the dynamics that have made us feel isolated or stressed?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very important one. And particularly coming out of this difficult 14-month period, people are in recovery because it's been kind of a traumatic time. And the people who are a little sunburned from overexposure, having their kids home from school all day, and it's especially hard on the introverts who didn't get enough alone time, that they need to give themselves plentiful helpings, maybe extra, negotiate for that need to have the alone time since they've been so deprived of it for so long. And us extroverts, well, we're so happy to be back with people again and be able to hug them and see their facial expressions and their body language and be up close and personal. I missed my women's group terribly during the pandemic. And now that we're starting to meet again, we're going so deep because it's so precious to be together and we're so happy to be with each other again. So we're making up for lost time. So to acknowledge that we have been stressed if we hadn't gotten our alone time or our connection time, and to gift ourselves with lots of it now. We're in recovery.
Well put.
Mm.
Any comment on that, Charlie?
Yeah, but first I want to just thank you, Georgia, for inviting us on. And it's so good to be with you and to see some friends that we haven't seen for a while. Yeah, I want to concur with what Linda was saying, particularly about the strange phenomenon of actually feeling both hemmed in and claustrophobic, and also at the same time wanting more contact with people, because the quality of the contact that we're having isn't necessarily soul nourishing. In fact, a lot of it is, some of it's unwanted. So it's not so much that we're actually spending time in which we're isolating, but at the same time, we're simultaneously having the kind of forced intimacy that we're not necessarily wanting. So it's a strange combination. These are unusual times. It's not something that we're prepared for. And over the last 14 months, we've learned a lot about dealing with what it's like to be in the experience of really not knowing what to expect. And also the stress that we have observed, not only in other people who have come to us looking for some kind of emotional or relationship support, but even in our own relationship, where we had mistakenly assumed that we've handled pretty much every challenge that a couple can have, and, so we got all that behind us, right? So we got that one taken care of, and guess what? We, just like many other people that we had been working with, found that we were slipping back into old defensive patterns that we thought were no longer there. Our patience seemed to have been diminished. We weren't as tolerant as we had been. We were finding ourselves shorter with each other, more critical, more impatient with ourselves even. And so we've learned quite a bit over the last year or so, which is one of the things that led to the book that we just finished writing. A lot of it just came from noticing our own responses to the circumstances that we hadn't really been prepared for.
That brings me to
what we'd like to do today is we're going to open up some space at the end of our talk
questions.
for questions.
But that brings me to, I'm going to skip ahead to a question because you brought it up. One of the books that you're offering 3 books for free today that I think John is putting that in the chat box. And one of them is called An End to Arguing. And I thought, this is something that has come up a lot for people in this past year, just like you were saying, that old habits started to resurface and intolerances started to resurface. Habits you thought you'd done away with and reactions you thought you'd handled are coming out. And there's a lack of patience and kind of a frustration. So in this book about how to end arguing, this seems to be a very challenging time for dealing with anger and eruptions of anger. What are some ways that you found to deal with that when you feel you're starting to get angry and it's not going to be at all productive? What are some of your ways of handling it?
One of the things that we find most useful, and we've discovered this in our relationship because we are both a couple of recovered hotheads, and we got tested during the pandemic when the stress was high to see whether we had really learned this lesson, is to take little mini breaks. And when you start to feel that your pulse rate is going up and your heart rate is going up and your blood pressure is going up and you hear this grumbling in your mind and you're going over the line to getting cranky, that's when you want to take a breath and take a little pause to reflect, to remember, we're going to get through this. It's not just because of what he's doing or not doing or saying or not saying. That this is the nature of the beast, that is the pandemic is fraught with stress. We're caged in, forced hibernation, we have to sequester in place, we're removed from the things that we enjoy. We can't party and we can't go to the bar and we can't go, to the places, the movie house, to the health club, to the ways in which we normally take care of ourselves and rejuvenate. And if we can see the big picture, just in a moment, we can settle down and come back to whatever the issue is in a more genteel way.
In theory.
Yes, and it is a very challenging practice. We may have to take a lot of breaks. We may have to use a lot of auto-suggestion and talk to ourselves about, okay, we're going to get through this and I'm going to calm myself down and I know how to do that. And I'm looking over at him and I like this man. I like this man and I trust this man. And we've had a lot of good times and there are reasons I'm with him. And this is just a little blip on the screen. We're going to handle it. But it's going to take more effort on our part to meet the tension level that crises carry with it. So we're going to have better coping mechanisms than in our normal life.
We may have to change some of our communication patterns because they may not be applicable or appropriate for these times. We may need to work on becoming more compassionate, more patient, more tolerant. These are not easy practices to integrate because, we've all kind of adapted to the circumstances that we call, quote, normal. We heard that phrase a lot, the new normal, what's it going to be? Well, I'm not sure what it's going to be. I don't think we're there yet. We're not in the old one for sure. So we're in this period of transition where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know for sure much of anything in terms of the future.
But it is a lot better. Things are definitely improving.
Oh, yes, because of the vaccination, which I want to get back to in a minute. But I wanted to ask you, because you keep bringing up things that I want to talk more about. And one of them is when you talk about taking breaks, I think this is a really critical piece here, to know that now is the time to take a break. How do you get the other person to understand, if they're not together like 30 or 40 years, how do you get the person you're in this dynamic with to understand that, yes, we need a break and to stop talking right now? Because how do you do this?
Great question. And we often say you sometimes have to have a conversation about having the conversation. So preliminary, head off trouble at the pass, put an agreement in place that if either one of us notices that we're getting overheated, where we're getting ready to go over the line to be critical, accusatory, threatening, irritable, cranky, that either one of us can say, it's time to take a break. And the way we take that break means everything. You don't stomp off and slam the door on the way out, because that's letting the other person know you're impossible to deal with, and that's not helpful. We want to do it in a respectful way and say, I need a moment to think about that. I'll be back as soon as I can, and not let the break take too long. And then what we do on the break is really important too, because sometimes people are planning their attack for when they re-engage, and we don't want to be doing that. We want to really use the break well to calm ourselves down, so when we re-engage, we can be our most constructive, collaborative self that we're bringing to the conversation.
I want to underscore just quickly that what we're talking about here, we're not limiting this at all to primary relationships or committed partnerships. This affects what these tendencies that we're talking about play out in all of our relationships. And so you don't have to be in a committed partnership to have some of these reactions that we're talking about, or to work to smooth out some of your rough edges, because it's going to come up with anyone with whom you have what you consider to be an important relationship. I mean, it could be even somebody that you don't know that well, because our fuses are much shorter. The bandwidth is not as long as it used to be.
And a lot
It's
of
not
people,
as broad as it used to be.
a lot of people are working from home and they're Zooming with their work team. And that's a new way of being, that they usually are in the workplace together, collaborating, and it's challenging. Getting all the technology working for you is challenging enough, but being able to express what you want to express and using your listening skills to be quiet and allow everybody to have airtime, so it really is a truly collaborative effort, can be really challenging in the workplace online.
Yeah, I find that actually Zoom, being kind of an introvert, I love Zoom.
Yeah.
I love this whole experience in terms of being able to get people from different parts of the country together. We've been able to interview people in Europe, which we could never do in real life. So there's been advantages that I've seen that I've actually appreciated and will continue doing as part of Praxis. We will always have a Zoom series, even if when we're doing live things, because it brings us an international viewpoint, which I think is very important. Following with what we were just talking about, we're also dealing with habits. And like you were saying, there's this tendency when we're under stress to kind of fall back into patterns or habits that we thought we dealt with. And sometimes there are certain types of behavior or things people say that just trigger us, and we don't even think, we just react with some nasty little comment or storm out of the room, or we do one of those things that obviously took no thought. It's just a reaction. So how are what are some of the methods that we could be stopping these reactions where we're like Pavlov's dogs reacting as soon as the trigger goes off? What are some ways that you've found to stop or to interrupt that process?
Yeah, interrupt, I think, is the correct word, because it is something that you have to do periodically. It's not like you can just decide that I'm not going to react and I've made that decision and that's that, and I won't. Well, we know how well that works. And I love, that how you're referring to that automatic tendency to react in ways that we say things that come out of our mouth and we don't even realize, how, what we're saying until it's too late and we can't put it back in. And the psychoanalyst, Marion Woodman, has this wonderful phrase, and she refers to that as the poison toads jumping out of our mouth. And, we sometimes the best we can do is to repair the damage, by apologizing or acknowledging it, or that once it happens, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. But what you can do is you can take responsibility for it. You can make an effort to repair that in some way by acknowledging what you've done. And, in terms of dealing with that habit or that tendency that, we have to say things impulsively when we're overly stressed, the first step that we found is really essential, which is a step that most people skip, is to just, as soon as you become aware that the poison toad has jumped out, either because you've seen it yourself or, your person you're speaking to has given you a little, quote, feedback. As soon as you become aware of it, just to acknowledge, yes, I just want to say, I'm really stressed out right now, or I realize I just, said something that I'm feeling kind of regretful about, or, I want to just acknowledge that I'm at a point now where I really need to take a breath, or I need to take a break, because I'm noticing that I'm really getting to that point. If we can do it prior to exploding or to, saying something regretful, then that's good. But even if we can't do it before, if we can do it soon after the event and just acknowledge it, that can not only cool us down, but it can cool down the tension that may have been created in the relationship. So just to acknowledge, I'm at the edge, or I'm over the edge, or, I'm triggered right now.
So to summarize what Charlie's saying, and I'm totally with everything he said, but the bottom line is what we have found in our 4 decades plus of working with the most successful relationships, they're all champions of repair.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they don't have breakdowns, but they're on it with being responsible about cleaning up right away.
Yeah, that's something I think we don't have any training for in our society. So we have to learn it, usually when we're adults. And I have found that it's very difficult. People have, especially Americans, have a really hard time apologizing.
Mm-hmm.
This seems to be part of our culture. And it's often seen, or we think it will be seen as weakness.
That's right.
So I'd like you to comment on that.
When we apologize for it to work, we have to be sincere and authentic.
Mm-hmm.
It has to come from a vulnerable, genuine place that we're contrite. And a lot of people have trouble dropping down into that level of vulnerability. And they associate it with being weak.
Right.
We don't see it that way. We feel that it takes incredible courage and strength to be willing to be vulnerable. And that is such a healing quality, because in every breakdown, every relationship has breakdowns. And in every breakdown, there's an opportunity for there to be learning and for there to be healing or not.
So every apology, in order to be effective and successful, like Linda said, it has to be sincere. And another quality that has to be in an effective apology is responsibility. For example, the so-called apology, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. Not an apology.
Right.
That is not an apology, because there's no acknowledgement of responsibility. There's no recognition of the damage or the pain or the harm or the hurt that my actions or words may have caused. So there's got to be that level of responsibility. It doesn't mean, that I'm coming to you, mea culpa, oh, I did such a terrible thing. It just means, yeah, I am acknowledging you've got a right to, I can understand how you could feel that way, basically.
You brought up a really good point there, that I'm sorry that you feel.
Yeah.
This is a critical thing, because it's sometimes, I've heard that a lot, and it's something that you have to have a good response for. When someone says, well, I'm sorry that you feel this way, I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, right.
How do you respond to that?
That doesn't satisfy me. Do you know that they need feedback, responsible?
What do you mean doesn't satisfy you? I'm going to just apologize.
I know,
What
but
do you want from me? Jeez.
it is
Right. That's what happens.
apology. I don't hear any learning going on here, any recognition or any responsibility for the part that you played. I'm not saying it's all
you're
yours.
the one who made me feel that way.
Oh, wait a
Jeez.
minute. Now I can't make you feel any kind of way.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking
you
about.
You look at me that way, I know what you're thinking. Yeah.
It's grabbing some ground to tell me what I'm thinking. How about I'll tell you what I'm thinking and feeling and needing. And what I'm needing right now is for you to take ownership of the part that you played.
They think that we're play acting.
No, I know you're play acting, but you're playing out exactly what happens.
Yeah.
That's exactly the scenario.
The crucial piece about an apology isn't just the I'm sorry and coming from a sincere place. What people are wanting to hear, longing to hear, is that you've learned something out of the breakdown. So you just don't say I'm sorry as a throwaway, as a toss away, and then you go and do it again. Mm-hmm. I've learned something here, and I see that I hurt you or disappointed you. I broke the agreement. I'm going to be more careful about that in the future.
Great. This is really helpful. So I wanted to have you talk a little bit about your book, the one that's going to be coming out soon, Love in the Time of Crisis. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, the book really is about, it's kind of a collection of things that we have learned in the process from the people that we've worked with and from our own experiences. And it is designed to help people to put in context the magnitude of the challenge that we have been up against, that we continue to be up against, although things are improving for sure, in order to be able to cut ourselves more slack and cut other people more slack, and to develop some practices that we can replace some of our old habits with that have been coming up, that can accomplish two things. Number one, that can help us to become more self-referential and self-caring and provide for our own needs, which have been neglected for most of us to some degree. And also to be able to nurture the relationship too, which is in need of caring attention. I mean, the big challenge in all relationships is to fulfill two seemingly contradictory needs. One is to provide for the well-being and care and nurturing of the relationship itself and the other person, but at the same time not to neglect ourselves and to fulfill our responsibility to provide for our needs too. Doesn't mean that we do that alone, but if we need support, then we're the ones who are responsible for bringing that into our lives. So that's a tricky balance, and we all have developed certain strategies to do that, but a lot of them have gone out the window over the past year or so. So the book is designed to help people to see things from a more enlightened perspective in terms of the current reality, and also to have some tools. That's in the subtitle of the book.
Right.
Some tools to really be able to implement some of these changes.
So in the book, we deal with some of the things that we're dealing with tonight about identifying the stressors and the stress reduction that works for us and how to add to them, about repair, about how to reduce the arguments and the reactivity. And we end the book with mining the crisis for the gold, because I'm from the school of thought of we mustn't let a good crisis go to waste. And if we can learn from the challenging times that we go through, not just the pandemic, health crisis, financial crisis, professional crisis, losses that we have, these are fraught with opportunity. When we teach our classes, we sometimes call them the AFGO. That stands for another friggin' growth opportunity. But when we're really up against it, you know, we can't keep things in the denial zone as easily as we can when we're in normal times. Mm-hmm. And so to look for that which has the most meaning to us, a crisis is good for that, to distill our most important values, the people who are most important to us in our lives, to do inventory to see if we're taking good care of those relationships, and to really see what the gifts are in the hands of the crisis, that we don't miss the opportunity to be a gracious receiver and get those gifts.
This is a very good point. When you talked about in normal times, we've been able to be in the denial zone.
Yeah.
And I think one of the pluses that has come out of this past year is that we've been forced out of this denial zone in many contexts, you know, friends, with family, with all kinds of people. We have been forced out of this denial zone for the better, I think.
Yes.
Because then we have to learn how to deal with it. Now, here's something I want to get your input on dealing with, which is more in the social realm. But it's, you know, we're seeing a tremendous uptick in cases of COVID in India now. That's just devastating. I mean, people are dying by the thousands without enough oxygen. And then we've got people in America saying, oh, I don't want to get the vaccine. Mm. So it feels like it's almost a white person's entitlement to not get it. But I wanted to get your opinion on, we all have friends or family who are not getting the vaccine, and I don't know what all their reasons are. I know some of them, but I'm more interested in how do we talk to people who are refusing to get the vaccine under these circumstances? What is your take on that? I'd like to hear from both of you, actually.
I have a friend who lives in North Lake Tahoe. His name is Tom, and he likens the people who are not choosing to have the vaccine. He says it's like going to an orgy without a condom. I mean, it's
Tom, though.
It's Tom.
That's Tom.
But he's poking fun and he's making a joke, but he's also got, in my point of view, a profound teaching there about being careful, mm-hmm. about being responsible, about protecting our health and other people's health by really being mindful about how much is at stake here. And I appreciate his little joke that I think has quite a teaching in it.
I want to respond a little bit more directly to your question, Georgia. I think that this is an incredibly important question for those of us, and fortunately there are many, many of us who share your concern about this strange and inexplicable phenomenon.
Mm.
That, you know, it's like we're being offered, you know, this preventive measure, this antidote. And why would anyone in their rational right mind say no? I mean, that's how it seems. And yet, strangely, a lot of people do say no for various reasons. So some of us have those people in our own families. Some of us have people with whom we're close who in other ways are very open-minded and progressive-minded and realistic. And but for some reason, they are in this mindset, and it is a set. And you know, there's this phenomenon called confirmation bias, which some of you may be familiar with, which has to do with the tendency to make a decision about something, whether it's to be a Democrat or a Republican, whether it's to believe in God or not. I mean, it could be about anything. It could be about a small detail. But that once we really lock into it, and with a lot of these people, they have locked into it, reason and rational dialogue does not affect it. You cannot reason with a person once they have made that decision for whatever reason. And so one of the things that I've found is that when I'm with somebody who is on a position like the one that you mentioned, like, you know, I don't trust this thing, I'm not going to take it. The impulse is often to try to persuade that person to understand our point of view, or to influence them to become more receptive to a different attitude. That doesn't work. What does work is, first of all, to express a desire to understand why they feel the way they do, to inquire into them, to ask them questions out of our own desire to understand, not like, how could you be so stupid? But I really, you know, tell me how it is that you see this, that you have come to this conclusion. But a genuine interest in that,
The
not just the
Socratic
way,
method.
what's that?
The Socratic method.
Yeah, yeah. Essentially, once they get that, you know, you're not there, because a lot of us are there to change their mind, and people get that. They're not stupid. And if that is our orientation, if that's our attitude, then they're not going to be particularly inclined to be open-minded. We want them to at least become sufficiently trusting that we're not there to make them wrong or change them. And then maybe they'll be a little more open to us. But you know, you got to deal with that impulse, that desire, you know, to talk some sense into this person.
Right. Definitely one of my triggers.
Yeah, it requires that sincere curiosity and wonder that helps them feel safe. Requires us to put our own bias aside temporarily, so that we presence the kind of openness that we're hoping to presence in them. You know, that's contagious. But if they feel that we're sitting in judgment of them and we're critical and we've got an agenda to talk them into something, they'll close off. Nobody's going to tell me what to do.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, this has been really, really good. I've enjoyed this so much. And I know that there are people who want to ask questions and want to get involved in a discussion with you. So I'm going to ask you, when I call on you, you can unmute, otherwise stay mute until you are called on. So I'm looking to see if we've got some raised hands. Anyone want to bring up a point or a question?
There's a few questions, I'd say, just randomly throughout the chat. One person asks, we're assuming intent to repair, but what about rageaholics who thrive on anger, for example? And then Larry has a question. He's got his hand raised.
Let's go to the first. Let's do that first one first.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it kind of speaks for itself. A rageaholic is someone who is addicted to using anger as a form of control and manipulation and intimidation. And again, it's one of those situations where we need to make an assessment, hopefully an accurate assessment about whether or not I can even have a conversation with this person if I have an experience or history with them in which, as soon as they feel offended or threatened, they go into rage. So if you do make the call to take the risk of getting into a conversation or a discussion that could turn into an argument or worse, it's really important to give that person feedback and to set some clear boundaries to protect yourself from an assault, a verbal assault. And the way you can do that is just at the soonest, at the earliest possible time in the conversation before it goes totally down the rabbit hole. To let the person know, give them some feedback that it is not okay with you for them to personally assault you or attack you with condemnation or hurtful judgments, that you're not interested in their opinion of you. You don't have any desire to hear that, but what you do have a desire to hear is what they're feeling and what they're thinking. To clarify that and to see how they respond. You know, if they can take that feedback and respect it. But often somebody who really is addicted to rage, what they'll do is they'll rage at you saying that.
Right.
And at that point, you know, you may have to say, look, this isn't working.
The boundaries.
The boundaries. I'm not willing to continue
Boundaries.
this at this level. I'm not willing to continue this. When you feel like you want to continue and you can do it in a way that is more respectful to me, then we can maybe resume it. And you know, if they persist in assaulting you with judgments that are unasked for, unsolicited, then you may have to physically just remove yourself and say, hey, you know, I'm out of here right now.
That's one of the things we learned in conflict resolution, was that not all conflicts can be resolved.
That's right.
That's exactly
And
right.
it's very important for people to know that. They can't make everything good.
No.
And not everybody is up for making an agreement about repairing their
Exactly.
breakdowns.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
the other person's not interested. Don't waste your time and energy trying to enroll them in something they're not motivated to join you in.
That's right.
Right.
Get yourself out of harm's way.
Exactly. Okay, I'm going to go to Larry and then Mike. So Larry, you want to unmute?
Am I hearable?
I hear you.
We hear you.
Okay. What I was asking is if you have references for people like me that are trying to figure out how we can educate ourselves inside of small neighborhoods and villages. You know, I worked a couple dozen years here in Sonoma Valley with different communities, and it seems like we need to do a lot of learning. And it seems to me that people like you are very good at knowing what to do, and you have a great expanse, but we don't know how to turn that into a kind of home-based curricula so that the neighbors can get together, who want to get together and want to learn what to do, but don't really have the facilitation. And it's one thing to do it with mental health. It's another thing to do it with fire protection. It's another thing to do it with aging and what the problems are in the neighborhood with people that need help but don't know how to reach out for it. It's just a whole bunch of issues are coming down on us. And it doesn't seem to me, on the people that I talk to who are all activists and doing great things, that anybody's quite put it together on how we bring these willing people in a neighborhood or in a village together to learn. And how do we set up a learning system so that people like you can be educating us as to how we deal with that. I know George has done some things with conflict resolution, but that's, you know, it's sort of like not enough for what I think is an impending crises upon crises upon crises for the rest of our lives. I mean, I see us in a terrible position globally, personally, the whole thing. So I think we have to, things are changing faster than we can cope with.
Right.
We better get into a crisis mode now and learn to deal with it, because it's too late by the time the crisis actually comes.
Mm,
Thank you very
So,
much for the
yeah,
question.
beautiful.
I'm asking for your help.
Really
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
that communities and neighborhoods have regular, ongoing meetings, and that people have a chance to voice their concerns. And it can be overwhelming because so many people have such issues that are really important to them, and it may be different from some of the other members of the group. But if we can circulate around so that people have a chance to voice their concern, it takes a little of the pressure off of it just to be witnessed, and that the other people with their care hold the concern that that person has. If you can find somebody who can facilitate, that's wonderful. But not to wait until you can find the person to facilitate. You can rotate around who's in charge for that particular evening session. And instead of having a leader, you can have a leaderless, leader-full group, and someone is responsible for moderating and giving a chance to share their concerns, to come up with some ideas about things that maybe could be action plans. And out of that deep listening to each other, that will show what this group may be able to mobilize to be able to take action together with the power of the group. I just want to tell you a little story about a woman that I met on a plane many years ago when I was going to Little Rock, Arkansas to teach a class. And I was speaking with her, are you going to Little Rock because you live there? And she said, no, I'm going to teach a course. I said, oh, I'm going to Little Rock to teach a course too. You see the man across the aisle? That's my husband. We're going to teach the course together. And the woman, this little old lady, she's probably younger than I am now, she starts to cry. And she said, oh, you're so lucky that you get to teach with your husband. My husband and I used to teach together, and he passed away, so I have to teach by myself now.
Oh.
And I said, well, it sounds to me like you had a really beautiful relationship with your husband. Please tell me what I should tell my class. You know, you're in the graduating class ahead of me. What should I tell him? And she had a strong Southern accent. She was from Texas. She says, honey, you tell him, just keep talking. And I just felt like that was wisdom from the wise elder, that if we get a group of action-oriented community members who care about addressing the social problems of their community, and they just keep talking with each other, something magical and wonderful will come out of that, as long as it's done respectfully and the monologuers don't dominate the group, so everybody has a voice.
That's what I was just going to bring up, is there need to be ground rules usually.
Yeah.
So that monologuers don't have an opportunity. One thing I've noticed, you know, in facilitating certain meetings is that you give the people opportunity to introduce themselves, and you say, take a minute to say who you are, what you do. And the first three people are fine. They don't take more than a minute. You get to the fourth or the fifth and the sixth, and they're taking 5 minutes if you let them. So it's like having the ground rules right up front and then staying with them, not letting the thing drift off, then becomes part of a really important way of facilitating and making sure things stay on track. So that's just another part that complements this. So I want to go to Mike now.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for all this. I just want to kind of clarify something in my own head, where the conversation went off to a place where I think you're talking about in general. This started about 10, 20 minutes ago about, I don't want to get the shot. Oh, please tell me the reasons why. Please give me your logical reasons why. That's where it came from. But you're talking about conflict resolution of any kind of situation that people in the community maybe disagree with. Because what I think Larry already and Linda already probably answered it, but you're talking about getting groups together to talk about it. But if you're just having a discussion with somebody, whatever it is, gods, gun, Trump, get the shot, don't get the shot. And you want to be very kind, and you want to talk to them very politely, and you want to hear what they have to say. And then you listen to their explanation for whatever, 15, 20 minutes, that nobody's fighting, nobody's cursing at each other, but you disagree with 25 things that they just said because you think they're insane inside, deep down. I'm sorry, but you just think they're nuts. That goes back to this whole polarizing of the country. So where does it go from there? Is that why you're saying set up these community groups to discuss these things, and somehow you're going to get to some answer where you're going to get 95% of people that will take the shot? Or I just don't know how you get to that point where, after being polite and kind and open and listening, agitated, just thinking about that I have to listen to these people. And then where do you go from there when you're completely opposite of everything they just said in so many directions? I just don't know what the next step is. It becomes so incredibly frustrating. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I understand, Mike, what your
Thank you.
concern is, and I think it's a very valid one. Like Linda and Georgia both mentioned, that not everyone is really interested in learning or understanding. Some people are more attached to being right about their position. They have no motivation to consider their point of view. And what we're suggesting is that, yes, this does apply to any conversation that you have in the context of a one-on-one relationship or a relationship with individuals in a group or the whole group itself. There's a great saying that I really believe in, which is that people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it may sound, kind of, trite, but I think it's really true. And how do we show that we care about them, about what they feel or why they feel that way, even if we disagree with 95% of what they're saying? We listen and we solicit information from them through our questions, not questions that are gotcha questions, not questions that are designed to get a specific answer, but open-ended questions.
Tell me more.
Like, how is it that you came to conclude that? Just so that I can understand it. And hopefully, and usually, there will be something in what they're saying that is in the maybe 5% of all of the other stuff that we can say, yeah, I can understand how you could see it that way, or I can understand how you could feel that way. And that kind of response will, to some degree, assure them that we're not out to make them wrong, because that's what most people are expecting when they say things that they think could be provocative. They're kind of bracing themselves for a defensive, to make a defensive response. And so when we don't respond with anything that feels threatening, that feels like it's an inquiry into them out of our own desire to understand better, they're less attached. They become a little bit less attached, and hopefully maybe even a little bit curious about how we see it. And sometimes what we found is that after we've given them space to say what they say, and then we can find one thing in what they said, which is, kind of affirming. We ignored the other 95% of the stuff. Oh yeah, well, okay, I understand that. I've been there myself. I can see that. Often what they'll do is they'll say, well, how do you see it? They'll actually ask us. And when they don't, what I'll usually say is, okay, well, thanks for letting me know that. Do you have any interest in knowing what my perspective is on it? And usually, but not always, they'll say, sure, but not always. And if they say no, well, I generally am not too interested in continuing the conversation at that point, because what is there to talk about? They've already made it clear to me that, they're totally closed to anything I can say. But there's a chance that maybe they will be somewhat open. they'll surely be more open than they would be if I came into the conversation trying to convince them of why they're wrong or judging them for being such an idiot, which I might think.
It takes so much patience.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I feel very lacking in that quality.
Trust, too. Trust that caring can be enough to open the possibility.
And self-discipline.
Yeah.
Yes,
With the judgments in our mind that can overwhelm us.
right. I'm going to go to Ben next, and then Lori, and then Katie. So Ben?
Yeah, I think this issue of attempting and failing to achieve herd immunity is going to be the next big kind of public policy / culture wars issue. I know this for a fact because Governor Ron DeSantis, who's this absolute lunatic, the Republican governor of Florida, has already moved to preempt any private business from enacting vaccine requirements for participation. And this, of course, will be litigated, but it's clear that they understand on some level. I mean, the conservative ideology is antithetical to the idea of collective action. So they have a rash against the idea of having to do something for someone else's good, as opposed to their own self-interest. They think that's a violation of some, moral principle. But so I'm less interested in persuading them than I am in coercing them through a system of basically rewards and punishments, which is that while we at least temporarily hold political power, we have the ability to set the parameters in terms of, being able to make sure that people are incentivized to get the vaccine for themselves, of course, but even for the common good. I mean, as it stands, we're so dumb we can't even achieve herd immunity. I mean, cattle can achieve herd immunity. That's how divided we are. So it's a big problem, and we're not going to solve it on a one-by-one basis, but these people will have to come to terms with the fact that you can't get on a plane, you can't go back to work, you can't send your kids to school. They're going to have a very tough time with this. This will be a huge culture wars, and I'm all in for it. I'm looking for it. I want to see it happen.
This is an interesting point. Do you want to say anything about it, either of you?
Well, I'm totally in agreement with Ben. I think that some things cannot be resolved through constructive dialogue. I think they need to be legislated. And public health and welfare is one example of that. And I certainly don't think that it is productive in issues that our elected representatives have decided need to be addressed, to try to persuade everybody to, kumbaya, because it ain't going to happen. And I think that it is appropriate at times to take a stand and just agree to disagree, but we have the power now, and we're going to, I'm just saying in an example like that, the person who has that authority has the responsibility to take action, even though it might threaten or offend or aggravate certain groups of people. I'm totally in agreement with that. I don't think that all things can be worked out to everybody's satisfaction. And some things you do have to make that call about, is it worth it to take this stand, even though we're going to get a lot of blowback and there may be problems. But I mean, it's basically an ethical and a moral issue of responsibility. So I'm with you on that.
Great, good answer. I think Lori is next.
Georgia, if it's okay with you, Katie has some good news to share. So
Okay.
maybe put her first and I'll go after her.
Okay, Katie, you want to go? Katie?
She's
She's muted.
You can hear me? Okay.
Now we can, yes.
All right. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to see you both again. Yes.
Hey, Katie, it's great to see you.
Oh my God, so exciting. And anyway, I've been a little quiet because you did cover a lot of ground. It was very, very good. Thank you so much. Well, the good news, Lori, put this out. I just finished my book on Audible called The Power of Being Heard. And I'd love your feedback. I'll send you a link. I guess in relationship.
Okay, we just lost Katie.
Muted.
You just got muted
Okay,
again.
sorry. I touched it with my finger. Sorry. I guess in relationship to what I just wrote about in my book, would be curious what you think will change the world.
This is your question.
I think you're on the right track about how desperate people are to be heard.
Mhm.
I think that people, in the years that we've been in practice, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people the anguish. I just want to be seen. I just want to be heard. I just want to be validated for who I am. I want to be acknowledged. I want to be loved as is. And that is such a powerful force in romantic relationships, in parent-child relationships, in siblings, in families, with our families of choice, with these community action groups that are meeting. And I feel that every family is the basic unit of the culture.
That's
If we can learn the skills
right.
of dealing with our differences, each one of us, in
Yeah.
the people that we relate to, it has spillover effect to the wider community. And I think we just have to start with ourselves to be fantastic listeners, to negotiate for our needs, to appeal to the people in our life, to their enlightened self-interest. Your life is going to be way better when our relationship
Right.
is smoking,
Right.
you know? And I think you're really on the right track with what you're writing about here. It will have far-reaching ripple effects
Thank you.
out
I mean,
and
I'm
around.
so excited that you would say that because I felt, anyway, I won't take up too much more time on it, but I was alone in the pandemic doing most of it, wondering if I really had a valid premise, and that is exactly what it is. And I just, I guess other than that, I wanted to add that I've noticed I went through a quick, big conflict with a girlfriend this year, and I kept noticing that I had to make the choice. Was this a relationship I wanted to do this much work with? Because I really sweat a lot with her. She was not easy, and we got through it. So I wanted to say it's a choice we have. And the last thing is, what do you do with the roll of the eyes? Oh my God, you want to talk about that again? Didn't we just go over that?
It's the roll of the eyes is contempt. It's poison for relationships.
Ah, I love the answer.
Poison. And so if somebody's holding us in contempt and they're rolling our eyes of, we have to go over this again, I think we need to negotiate for our needs and
Thank you.
say, I'm bringing it up again because it's still alive for me. It still hurts for me. I still have fear around this. I don't want this issue to go underground. My relationship with you means too much to leave this incomplete. So yes, we have to go over it again. Will you hang in there with me until we have this breakdown become a breakthrough? Because it could be a breakup.
Right. Okay, Lori.
Well, that was wonderful. Okay, right there. I just wanted to say that I think, you know, I deal with several different groups of people at this point and have through the pandemic. And I think we're all just learning how to get back together again. And to me, I just can't stress enough. And of this, stress is a verb, okay? you know, an action that hope people will do is the value of patience, like listening and patience. Because I'm like sitting there on my phone and I've got a text and the person is telling me blah, 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 and this needs to be done, so forth and so on. And I'm going like, that's kind of like old school for me now. All right. I'm a different person. I'm evolving. I've gone through a major trauma in my life. And this can happen to any other person who is around, okay, in your neighborhood, your community, and whatever. You can't just pick up at the old normal and expect people to respond. So I don't see a lot of compassion and empathy being practiced. So how do you request that when you're in that situation?
Wow, another great question. Thank you for that, Lori. You know, you are, you had mentioned this thing about noticing patience is a big thing these days because we need more patience if we want to stay sane. Otherwise, we will literally go out of our minds if we indulge the impulse to get overwhelmed with impatience. We have to cultivate it because we don't have access to the other means of avoiding the stress that we used to have before. And so there are people in our lives who haven't seen their challenge as being to develop certain qualities within themselves during this time. They see it rather in terms of indulging the reactive patterns of intolerance, impatience, judgment, resistance, the things that, you know, we were able to, quote, get away with during times when we had access to other ways of avoidance. So what do we do when we're practicing patience? We're trying to become more adaptive to the current circumstances, but some of the people we're dealing with are still stuck in the old way of being. That's happening for a lot of us, even within the context of very intimate relationships like a marriage, where one person is seeing this as, like Linda said, an AFGO, another freaking growth opportunity, but they're dealing with it. They're trying to use it to exploit the growth potential of it, and they're trying to develop themselves in ways that they hadn't before. But then, you know, they're with somebody who is, you know, they're stuck in bitterness, resentment, resistance. You know, it's not fair. I'm a victim, and whoa. So how do I deal with that? How do you know? Do I just become patient and, you know, tolerate this person's negativity? Because at some point that becomes really not only unpleasant but kind of toxic to be subject to that on an ongoing basis. And so, you know, some of our relationships might change. We may choose to spend less time with certain people. We may choose to expose less of our vulnerability to certain people. But I think that we have to give it a shot. We have to make an effort to let them know what's working and what isn't working for us in the relationship, to give them a chance to demonstrate whether or not they have any motivation in self-reflection rather than in just complaining about things. So yeah, it's tricky, but you know, we have to be willing to be more vulnerable ourselves, more honest, and to be willing to readjust or even maybe even let go of the relationship if necessary. Not everybody is really open to some of the things that we're talking about here today.
It's good to know the difference. If there isn't someone new, I'm going to call on Ben again. Ben?
Yeah. One of the things that I've been working with during the pandemic is just recognizing the degree to which my psychological state is grounded in my physiological state. So I've become much more attentive to the four food groups of sleeping, eating, moving, and meditating every day. And particularly for me, the thing that has helped the most is to get out in the sunlight and hike every day. And this brings me to a question that I think I would kind of like you, the two of you, to answer, because I feel like this re-entry that we're all doing is interesting to see. Like it's almost like the psychographic terrain has changed, and there's two ways we can approach it. One is it's going to be hinky because people are their social muscles are disused, and frankly, things aren't going to return to the same. I've seen this even in terms of how people have gotten sort of paralyzed in place by the quarantine. Like I go hiking every day to Maxwell Park. It's this 40-acre park, acres and acres of beautiful sunny. I'm like, wow, I'm the only person here except for a couple of Mexican families, picking the berries. I was like, there are 10,000 white people and Latinos within walking distance of this, and they've spent the entire quarantine in their houses on screens. So I kind of like the idea of being a psychonaut into the new psychographic terrain. And my role model there is I follow Jonah Raskin, the kind of bohemian poet and writer on Facebook, and he is great. He's a role model for me. He's like, as soon as he got his,
do you have a question?
his question was, what I'm saying is, I'm actually making a statement about my new career as a daring psychonaut, trying to kind of stream into this new terrain, like this is like the Wild West. We're going to reclaim this territory, and we can help set some of the new parameters. That's how I look at it. So the question is, what about this like sense of paralysis that's set in? People aren't moving, and people are not healthy. And I think for me, that as soon as I got my shots, I'm ready to get out and mix it up with the world. It's just a background risk. I'm not fixated by it anymore. But I don't know what the larger answer is. That's my answer.
Mm-hmm. So I'll respond by saying that I believe that the pandemic scared the wits out of a lot of people who had a lot of fear. A lot of people were isolated and lonely before, and it amped it up. And so people have been traumatized, and they're gently, slowly coming out of that paralysis of fear. Those of us who are recovering faster and able to go out in the world and re-engage in life and with people, I think those of us who are healthier and stronger, who have got spiritual practice, who have been using the pandemic as a growth opportunity, there's a responsibility that comes with having those blessings to reach out to some of the people who are a little bit more reticent to re-engage, who are having some difficulty coming out of the isolation. And each one of us can think about the people in our lives who may need a little extra support. Would you like to come and walk in the beautiful forest with me today? Do you feel up to coming to my home to share lunch with me? Do you know? And those of us who are recovering faster can help lead some of the people who really have been frightened to their core, who have been living in such terrible stress that it's hard for them to rally, to re-engage in life, even though it's available to us once again.
Good. I think if we don't have any more questions, we will wrap up. And do you have any final things that both of you would like to say?
Ken has something, it looks like.
Okay, Ken,
You're
Ken.
muted, Ken, so yeah, once.
There you are.
Yeah, nice to have you. I think I remember you a long time ago, very long time ago. You used to have a drumming situation. Am I wrong?
That's right. That's
You were
right.
drumming. I met you at Jane Zimmerman's house because you used to drum in her backyard when she lived on MacArthur. I believe that's what you did. I hope I have the right people.
Yeah.
You know Jane Zimmerman?
Sure do,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, there you go. Well, you were there and you were drumming. And that was about 35 years ago.
I'll take the word for it.
Okay. I think it's one thing to say that, yes, everybody can come out now. The evil doers are gone, whatever, the virus and anything else. When in fact, that's pretty far from what science is saying at this moment. There are people in the medical profession who are saying they're very worried that people, even with people who've been vaccinated, that they are the variants. There are so many variants, and they're coming from so many different directions. And most of the world has not been vaccinated, so we're never going to have it under total control. We're going to have to deal with this for many, many years, and variations of this.
Yeah.
So to come out and practice the things you've always done in life, I think is very tricky. And I think I know I'm one of the ones who was very fearful of it. I'm compromised to begin with, and being around anybody with a virus was a terrible thought. And now knowing more and more and keeping up to date on the literature, it doesn't seem like, I think everybody still has to be guarded and to feel that this is a very free time because people are getting vaccinated, and again, only in America, it just seems like. But what do you think of that? Because it's not a fait accompli. It's not over. So to get to the point you're talking about and having that sense of freedom, I think is going to be extremely difficult for people who are following it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think?
Whew. A lot. We all have to come to our own conclusion about how we are going to deal with this changing world that has always been changing. It's just that we're not as able to convince ourselves that we can control it.
Right.
It's become very evident that we can't. And my way of dealing with that is to get clear about where are the sources of information about our current reality and the anticipated world that we're looking ahead to, that I find trustworthy, and to do the best that I can do to give myself access to those voices, and knowing that there's so many other voices competing with them that I would be overwhelmed with confusion if I hadn't been clear about who I'm choosing to listen to. And then to, basically recognize that my responsibility now, as I'm accumulating this information, is to cultivate my own level of self-trust to be able to decide how to implement the information that's coming in an ongoing basis, and to live in a way that I'm not indulging my tendency to attach to a particular fixed answer to things. The best I can do, the most valuable thing I can do, is to try to live as mindfully as possible with what's true for me in any given moment, which changes as new information comes in and as old information may become invalidated. Just to be, okay, so what's true for me now? how does it look to me at this moment? What seems to be the best choice to make at this point? I keep coming back to living mindfully, living as present as I can. Because not only does that give me access to current information, but it also gives me access, an ability to cultivate more trust in my own judgment.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's my response to it.
Yeah, that's very helpful because we are getting different information on an ongoing basis, and we can't be locked in to a certain way of looking at it. We can have our parameters that make us feel safe.
Yeah.
I think that's because the vaccination is supposedly 95%,
Yeah.
but there's that 5%. So, you know, there is that tendency. I think it's important to realize there is that 5%, and maybe we don't socialize as much with people who haven't been vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, how would you like to leave our group today, Linda and Charlie? What parting words of wisdom do you have for us?
I want to thank you, Georgia, for hosting and moderating, and thank you everybody for showing up and paying attention and offering your juicy, wonderful questions. And my closing remarks are, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Take some time to see what you have learned, how you've grown, what meaning came from this very stressful time that will serve you well going forward from here, because crises really suck.
Yeah.
We would do anything to avoid them if we could, but I hate meaningless suffering. If we have to suffer, at least learn something and make some meaning from it that will enhance our lives going forward. So I wish that for all of you.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for showing up here with us and for being engaged. I find it personally very fulfilling to engage with people, even if you didn't say anything during this. I felt your presence, and what that does is it brings out for me what's within me that otherwise may not have been activated, that I may not have even been aware of, is true. So I personally have really appreciated your participation in this, however it showed up. And I want to acknowledge you for your intention demonstrated by your presence here today to learn and to become more cognizant of and more motivated to recognize and to respond to the challenge of our current time, rather than slipping into some of the old patterns of feeling like getting stuck in the feeling of being a victim or helpless or despairing. But your presence here shows that we still have that intention to do what Linda said, which is take advantage of the challenge of the opportunities that are present here. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you both so much for being part of our series today. I feel like I've learned a lot. We've saved the chat. We will put this on YouTube tonight, and I'm going to stop the recording now, and we can hang out for a little while.